I have not been this excited to make a video in a very long time here. I'm sorry that we have not posted on this channel in a couple of weeks. I thought I was going to be able to upload every single week for y'all during the season, and I just got caught up. 5-hour live streams every day on the Redraft channel. But we are back. I'm going to get y'all a video at least every single week on the Dynasty channel going forward. And yeah, this video, we're going to be talking about some skyrocketing wide receivers. What's really fun is a lot of these guys who were talking about being buy low candidates literally in the last video we had right before the season started. But before we get into it, go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. Only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And of course, if you have any questions, go down to the comment section below. I'm going to be trying to answer as many questions as I possibly can. But that should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into our first wide receiver here, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, oh my gosh, we go over to Keep Trade Cut right now. You have Amon-Ra St. Brown at 17 overall. And honestly, it's hard to argue against this. Amon-Ra St. Brown at the end of his rookie season, 6 straight games. 6 straight games with double-digit targets. Literally, look at that game log. 86 yards, 73, 90, 91, 111, 109. Then going to 2022, I was a little bit pessimistic in redraft leagues, going, okay, well, this is a wide receiver that has DeAndre Swift, TJ Hawkinson, DJ Chark, as well as Jameson Williams. It doesn't matter. I mean, dear God, the Detroit Lions with an elite offensive line, they're making Jared Goff look like a great quarterback. Amon-Ra St. Brown still repeating what he did at the end of his rookie season. I mean, 12 targets, 9 targets. Keep in mind that last game against Minnesota, he injured the ankle. He's been dominant. He's extremely young. And going forward, I mean, he is a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. Nobody can argue against that. Now, the question is he worth a top 2-round selection in a 12-team Dynasty Superflex startup? That is the true question. And if I'm looking at some of these players he is going right before Saquon Barkley, Kyle Pitts, Trevor Lawrence, I think dependent on your roster, you could make the argument to go Amon-Ra St. Brown because he's incredibly young. He fits a rebuilding team. He is producing. He fits a contending team. To be fair, if we are looking at someone that is plummeting down these rankings in Kyle Pitts, if it's a tight end premium format, I think the only way I'm selling Amon-Ra St. Brown compared to these other players he's going around is if it's a tight end premium league, I will sell Amon-Ra St. Brown for Kyle Pitts because we do need to think about the long term here in Detroit. We are going to get Jameson Williams coming back in probably about a month. And if we're also thinking about the quarterback situation, Jared Goff's been phenomenal. I mean, he's playing behind an elite offensive line. He's playing at an elite level. But can this maintain for an extremely long time? Is this something we're expecting to be happening in 2023, 2024? I would say Detroit still has a long-term hole at quarterback. The target competition is going to be increased with Amon-Ra St. Brown with the addition of Jameson Williams. I don't want to say he's not a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. I mean, he's 22 years old and he's a wide receiver 1 in a redraft. Of course, he's a wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. But I mean, if we could go through trade him for Kyle Pitts in a tight end premium league, I would really like that. Now going over to our next wide receiver in that same offense of Kyle Pitts, Drake London. I am so surprised to see that Drake London's been one of the highest risers according to Keep Trade Cut. How are y'all evaluating him coming into this season? We had him as a top 12 Dynasty asset coming into the year. I mean, Keep Trade Cut right now has him as the wide receiver 9. If we're looking at his season, the man's averaged 8 targets a game through the first month. He's had 18 receptions, 231 receiving yards. I think you're going to be so excited about Drake London for the long term. I mean, we talked about him as an elite level prospect, my wide receiver 1 in this year's rookie draft. And if we remember the prospect he was, broke out at 18 years old, dominated his junior season, dominated over a 45% mark with his receiving yards per game in his offense. It was phenomenal. You could not find a single flaw on his wide receiver prospect profile. And if we are looking in the long term, I would imagine the situation gets better. Now, I wish the Atlanta Falcons were 0-4. I truly do. I wish they were 0-4 and they were in line to get the number 1, number 2 overall pick in this year's NFL draft. And they were able to go find that long-term answer at the quarterback position. Clearly, being 2-2, if they keep this up, they're not going to be able to find that long-term answer in the draft. I mean, if they had like Jimmy Garoppolo here, for example, I think you can be very excited about Drake London. Now, even though I was higher on Drake London than a lot of other people coming into the season, I will say because they're 2-2, because I question the long-term play that they have at quarterback, if we could trade Drake London for CeeDee Lamb, who's after him according to Keep Trade Cut, sign me up. If we could trade Drake London for Breece Hall, who's after him on Keep Trade Cut, sign me up. Those are definitely 2 players that I would prefer. I don't necessarily want to say that Drake London's a sell high for sure, but at the same time, I mean, these are reasonable pieces we could be moving them for. Now, going over to our next guy, Chris Olave, one of my most drafted wide receivers in rookie drafts, because some people were thinking that you needed to be taking running backs in the middle of the first. No, clearly the rookie wide receivers were the way to go in this year's rookie draft. Chris Olave has risen up to where he is now a 3rd round starter pick. He's going right after Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Christian McCaffrey, going right before Nick Chubb, Najee Harris, and Michael Pittman. If we're looking at what he's done so far this season, I mean, the man's averaged 9 targets a game. That's including week 1, where you didn't get much for Chris Olave. Over the past 3 weeks, Chris Olave is averaging 11 targets a game, averaging close to 100 receiving yards a game. And that's with one of those games having Andy Dalton. I mean, he's so damn exciting. Now, thinking in the long term, similar to what we were doing with these other players, I don't know the long-term answer to the quarterback position for the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, this team is too well run to ever be a team that's getting a top 3 NFL draft pick, and they're able to go through and find the next franchise quarterback. But the situation may get better in a different way for Chris Olave going forward. Because if we look at a lot of the target competition he has in New Orleans, a lot of these guys are old. I mean, you have Alvin Kamara as a running back that was drafted in the 2017 NFL draft. You have Jarvis Landry drafted in the 2014 NFL draft. You have Michael Thomas, who next year is going to be 30 years old. So what I want to do is I want to look at the contracts and try to figure out who could be leaving New Orleans, possibly give more targets overall to Olave. You're looking at Michael Thomas. I mean, in 2023, they could cut him and save like $3 million. I think Michael Thomas is safe to make this roster next year. He will be 30 years old. I think in 2024, Michael Thomas is definitely out the door. Same thing with Kamara. If you're looking at this Alvin Kamara contract, there's no way in hell that they would cut him next year. But in 2024, they could save about $8 million. If they wanted to move on from Alvin Kamara, it would be a 29-year-old running back at that point. So it would be something we need to be on the lookout for. And then with Jarvis Landry, looks like Jarvis Landry is for sure not going to be in New Orleans next season. So Olave checked a ton of boxes, going back to that Ohio State wide receiver room that had Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Chris Olave was phenomenal. And so was another wide receiver there in Garrett Wilson. Super exciting with Wilson. Goes through in an offense that has Joe Flacco at quarterback. Dominates. Garrett Wilson averaging close to 10 targets a game here for the New York Jets. Now, keep in mind, with Garrett Wilson, he's also been playing significantly less snaps than Elijah Moore, than Corey Davis. Like, Garrett Wilson's been a part-time player for the New York Jets. This past week was the first week that we had Garrett Wilson with more snaps than Corey Davis, and he was almost neck and neck with the same amount of routes run as Elijah Moore. So they are expanding his role to make him that every down player here for the Jets, which is 100% what we want to see. If we look at where his value's gone, he's valued directly in front of Deshaun Watson, DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams. Now, I would rather have Deshaun Watson in a Dynasty Superflex League. I mean, to be honest, I'd rather have Deshaun Watson in Dynasty Superflex League over anybody we've talked about on this video. But still, I mean, I think that is a price point is probably fair, because if we're thinking the long term here, Corey Davis won't be here over the long term. Corey Davis has taken a lot of this production so far this season. I don't know. Garrett Wilson was one of those wide receivers that checked every single box in this year's NFL draft. I don't think we're selling him high unless you could get Deshaun Watson, of course. Now, going over to our next guy, Devonta Smith. I mean, obviously, pretty much anybody in Philadelphia you've had has skyrocketed in value. Here with Smith, this is a wide receiver that is now right ahead of Travis Kelce, Joe Mixon, Tua Tagovailoa, Dak Prescott. Now, I would take the quarterbacks in a 12-team Dynasty Superflex League. But if we're looking at the volume here, I mean, 27 targets. You do have A.J. Brown clearly as the wide receiver 1 in Philadelphia. I'm a little bit hesitant about this because we know the Philadelphia Eagles, they want to run the ball over and over again. With A.J. Brown being so young, being drafted in 2019, he's not going to be going anywhere for the time being. So this would be one of those spots where I would try to explore what we could sell Devonta Smith for. Like, he's back-to-back with Davante Adams in these Keep Trade Cut Dynasty rankings. If you could go sell him for Davante Adams, if you were a contending team, I think that would make sense. Go sell him for one of these quarterbacks as well in a 12-team Superflex League. But that's just because I think that you are looking at the wide receiver 2 in a run-heavy offense. Of course, love Smith the player. Love Smith the player. It's just compared to these other options. Now, going over to our next wide receiver, we are going to have Christian Kirk, who got paid a crap ton of money this past offseason. If we're looking at where he has started, I mean, he's 36 targets through the first 4 weeks, 9 targets a game, 330 receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns as well. He's been phenomenal. He's been a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And I have to sit here and I have to take my L. Y'all know after their rookie seasons, I looked at the adjusted yards per pass attempt for Zach Wilson, for Justin Fields, for Trevor Lawrence, for pretty much every rookie quarterback last year, not named Mac Jones. And I said, historically speaking, based on this long list of quarterbacks that have failed to this extent their rookie seasons, sell Justin Fields, sell Zach Wilson, sell Trevor Lawrence. We started saying that halfway through their rookie years because very rarely could a quarterback be that bad their rookie season, and changing the coach fixes everything. Well, to everybody who was smart enough to realize that Urban Meyer was legitimately probably just the worst NFL head coach of all time, congrats, because the Jacksonville Jaguars are phenomenal. And if we're looking at these players going right behind Christian Kirk, like Dameon Pierce, Deontay Johnson, or right ahead of him in Jameson Williams, Rashad Bateman, A.J. Dillon, Hollywood Brown, I don't think you can sell Christian Kirk for any of these prices. I think you're holding on to Kirk. But now going over to our next guy, Jahan Dodson, a first-round wide receiver out of Penn State. I mean, has 22 targets so far, 150 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, which is kind of weird when you're playing in that Carson Wentz-led offense. A wide receiver that was dominant his final 2 years at Penn State. You've heard me talk long enough about KJ Hamler, Pat Frymuth being at Penn State, skewing the data a little bit here with Jahan Dodson early on in his career. We need to look at the draft capital, his dominance his final 2 seasons, get excited about Jahan Dodson coming into the NFL. If we're looking at where he's valued now, Jahan Dodson right ahead of guys like Treylon Burks, James Robinson, Russell Wilson, Terry McLaurin. Now, if in that 12-team Superflex League, you could go trade Jahan Dodson for Russell Wilson, you do that ASAP. You don't think twice about it. However, if we are going to be looking at some of these other names, I probably would hold on to Jahan Dodson. Now, he is back-to-back with Trey Lance. You got to let me know in the comment section. Y'all know I am a big Trey Lance guy. Trey Lance on way too many Dynasty teams. Would you rather have Jahan Dodson or Trey Lance in Dynasty? But going over to our next guy in the same offense, Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel, the easiest sell high on this video. Like a lot of these players, I wouldn't be holding, but Curtis Samuel, you got to sell him high. He's had a phenomenal start, 37 targets, 26 receptions, 219 receiving yards with Curtis Samuel. He's surprisingly young as well. He's only 26 years old. Keep in mind, coming into the NFL, he was drafted at 20. Extremely young player. And if we're looking at the value that you could get for him right now, I just don't know. You could sell Curtis Samuel and you could go out there and get Kirk Cousins. You could go get James Conner on a contending team. On a contending team, I'd rather have DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, I'd rather have Dalton Schultz in a tight end premium league. I think that even some of these rookies like Sky Moore and Christian Watson, if I could go sell Curtis Samuel for Sky Moore and a second-round pick, or go sell Curtis Samuel in a third for Sky Moore in a second, I would love that as well. If we're looking at the Curtis Samuel contract, I mean, this is a wide receiver that if he were to have a disappointing second half of the season, they could decide to move on to him relatively easily to save about $5 million here. So I don't know. I think we sell high on Samuel, if I'm going to be honest with you. I just think the ceiling is severely capped when Terry McLaurin, when John Dodson are obviously locked in here for the long term. And very similar to what we were discussing with New Orleans. I mean, Washington has been losing games. They've lost 3 straight. But I think Washington's probably going to be good enough to not get a top 3 pick in the NFL draft and end up getting stuck in kind of no man's land where they're not able to find that long-term QB. Now, our last guy is going to be Romeo Dobbs. Romeo Dobbs, another sell-high player for me. I mean, with Dobbs, he's had a phenomenal start. 6 targets a game so far through the first month. He's had 184 receiving yards. Keep in mind, Allen Lazard got injured at the beginning of the season. Christian Watson was injured at the beginning of the season. So already in an extremely thin wide receiver room, you had other top options going down, really boosting up what you could assume that you were getting with Romeo Dobbs. Right now, he's going ahead of Miles Sanders, Mac Jones. I mean, for the love of God, give me Mac Jones over Romeo Dobbs. Going ahead of someone like Cam Akers as well. I'm recording this right before the Monday night game between the Rams and the 49ers. So we'll kind of wait on the game before we make any announcements, Cam Akers versus Romeo Dobbs. But I think that I would be looking to sell. He had an intriguing prospect profile coming in, but I would just be very surprised if he was the locked and loaded wide receiver 1 in the long term for the Green Bay Packers there. Now, thank you. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go down there, drop a like, subscribe to the channel only if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. Go to the comment section if you want more Dynasty videos, if you have any questions. But thank you again. I appreciate you. Hope we get to see you in the live stream on the Redraft channel sometime soon. And yeah, I'll hope to see you there.